that's what was modeled to me growing up. My dad showed me how to chase down a dream. I learned to make friends very quickly because we moved a lot. And the second I got out of high school, my football and basketball career was over. So my identity, I didn't know what I was going to do now because my identity was sports. And so it became rodeo. I was like, well, I can ride bucking horses. And that became it. And rodeo is like the perfect fit for somebody with a bunch of unprocessed pain because it is a party and you travel a lot. And I wasn't afraid of that because that's what was modeled to me.
Quick heads up, I want to encourage you guys, if you're listening with little ones around, we're going to talk about some heavier things. We're going to talk about addiction. We're going to talk about some abuse. We're going to talk about some suicide attempts, some heavier topics. I want to encourage you guys to put the earphones in or listen while you're in the car without your little ones. Only about 1 out of 20 episodes has a little warning like that. And sometimes we forget to give the warning. And then later it's like, oh, we went a little heavier. So here you go, little warning. I guess before we go back in time and hear some of your story, could you introduce your family, how old your kids are, and how long you and your wife have been married?
Yeah, so I have a daughter who's 25 that lives in Boise. She's from Billings, so I would see her like occasionally. I would go visit her when she was little, and she would come out to wherever we were once I got married and spend like parts of the summer with us and whatnot. But her and her mom lived in Billings her whole life until she moved to Boise to go to Boise State, which is super close. And then my wife and I have he'll be 16 in a couple weeks, year old, and then it drops down to 9, our middle boy, and then we have a 7-year old. So I'm a late bloomer because I'm 51. So
Yes, you got the littles at
it's it
51.
at soccer games, it's always fun because I cannot tell you how many times I've had people ask me, which grandkid's yours?
I just blame that on the beard. That's not, you don't look that
Yeah.
old. It's just that the beard carries a little bit of wisdom.
Yeah. It's fun. All my friends are like have grandkids my kids' age.
But
I
you
was
do.
so not ready to have kids before though.
I think there is something too. There's a story to be lived, and God has things to do sometimes in an order before we're ready to step into the dad life. I guess as a snapshot today, though, what are some things you guys do for fun when you're thinking about? Obviously, your older daughter is launched, is out of the home, but you're with your boys. What are some things that you guys do for fun as a family?
Um, we're a football family. I coach high school football, so my oldest son's on my team in the fall, and we camp a lot, and we have cows and stuff, so we're always doing something with them, moving them around to pastures in the summer, spring, and fall. We have a bunch of horses. They love riding bikes. We play in our barn where we have our wild courage fires here. We have a basketball hoop, so it's kind of basketball season right now. So we're playing a lot of pickup games, the four of us, um, and a lot of football at night in the living room. Like
Okay.
if you were to come to our living room, our family pictures are on a wall. Most of the glasses broke out of them, or they're hanging upside down or sideways because they've been knocked off the wall and the brackets are broke. So they're like it's just pandemonium all the time. They're boys. I read a definition that said boys noun and it said noise with dirt on it. And I'm like, yep, that pretty much sums it up.
I like that. Yeah. Can the 16-year-old, can he take you down in a game of basketball if you guys are battling it out?
He beat me in pig the other day, and
Okay.
that was a first. So that was a little bit challenging because fancied myself as a basketball guy.
Sure.
Um, but that's happening, and he's driving now. He's on his permit now, and he's about to in 2 weeks be on his own. It's
Wow.
crazy.
It's a
It's crazy.
threshold for sure. The
Yeah.
the picture though of your living room and the broken and mishung frames because fun has been had in that living room. I think there's probably a deeper, not that there's one right way. There's a level of unity with you and your wife deciding, hey, what rooms are going to be used for what fun, and how much of this fun should be taken outside. But how have you guys landed in that spot where the living room can be a spot of roughhouse, and like we're gonna have some fun, some physical fun in this space?
Well, first off, we live life outside mostly. So um, our house is like built in the 1930s. And so there isn't a level floor. The doors are tricky to open and close. Like this foundation's settled. And we were thinking about building a new house a couple of years ago. And we're like, that would be ridiculous because we have this huge, weird living room. And then there's no hallways. The bedrooms are literally right off the living room. So we have this awkwardly big living room. And the dogs and kids and cat, it's like it's a free for all. And we're like, we don't care about fancy, we care about memories. And so yeah, it's game on. It's full
Game.
contact.
Yes. The You mentioned it briefly, but Wild Courage is the name of the ministry that you're leading, and now that is all over the country, over the world. And before we go into what it is, um, those two words, wild and courage. Just take a moment to like talk about what does that mean, and start with on the home front for you personally and to your family. What are those two words? What do they bring up, stir up in you?
Well, I think wild is a definition that we all feel a call to as men. And the courage part of it is, what if we had the courage to tell our story? Because to me, the most healing I've received in a lot of areas has been when I've had the courage to be vulnerable enough to share my deep dark pain with someone, and it to be received with love back instead of what I'd built it up to be my whole life, which is, if you really knew me, there's no way you could like me, let alone love me. And so the courage part is comes from us having the courage to be seen, which I think is what we're all, I think God wired us to be seen and heard by others that we're in relationship with. And so I think it's the most, I think men will go to the moon, we'll climb Mount Everest, we'll jump off crazy things with parachutes, we'll ride bulls, we'll do crazy, survive in the wilderness. And we would rather do all of those things before being vulnerable. And I don't know, I've just found that it's the key to unlocking healing and to be what we're all really, like I said, created to be, which is to be seen and heard and not judged and loved where we're at in the mess of it all.
Wow.
So it was a name that was fought for by our founding members. And I wasn't big on it at first because there's Wild at Heart and there's Wild Sons and there's Wild Born Wild. There's so many things, but we just couldn't move off of those two words.
Yes. I I'm drawn to those two words, and I want to live into being a dad, a husband, who risks, a leader who risks, who lives with that wild, and also fully known that side of the courage to be transparent and vulnerable. And I guess when you said, most guys will do all these other hard things before they'll be vulnerable, I think given the right place and time and caring, trusted people, when I've gone there and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna be fully real in this moment," I then realize what a gift. What a gift. So then it's not scary. When you have the right setup, I think it maybe is even scary to get started to say. But if I go ask 20 guys today that I bump into, when was the last time you were invited to actually go below the surface and share what's really going on, to share some of your story, some of what's made you the person you are today. How many would you guess of if I picked 20 random guys, how many would say in the last 5 years they've had that opportunity?
I would place a large wager on that number being 0.
And what
And
is,
and you could pick 20 guys that are in the church and it would
yeah.
still be 0.
And just some of the reasons that number is zero. Can you already mentioned it's scary to kind of go there, but what are some of the reasons?
Shame. Again, if you knew me, there's no way you would really like me. If you really knew what was going inside of me or the things that I've done, there's no way you could like me. Forget about love and acceptance. And so we build these narratives of what people will react to our stories. And I get it. There's times where we've tried in toxic circles, and that vulnerability's been used against us and leveraged against us. So we just build up walls, and we're like, I knew it. I can't trust anyone to tell my story or to be vulnerable. I think it happens in bars more than it happens in, well, I know it does. It happens in bars more than it happens in church.
Yeah,
Because the first time I shared my story with somebody, I was hammered at a bar, and it was somebody I trusted.
yeah. Speaking of your story, I'll kind of jump to and guide to a few points of your story that I think
Sure.
would just be so helpful for us to give context to the work in the ministry that you're leading today. And I think there's so many like ways we can learn and grow and be fueled with courage because of what God's done through your story. So, Jeremy, if we jump back to childhood years and specifically around when your parents split, can you give us a little snapshot of what, yeah, that period of your life?
Yeah, so basically in kindergarten, like halfway through kindergarten, my mom and dad divorced, and my mom and little sister, who's a couple years younger than me, moved to like 4 hours away, and I stayed with my dad, which is kind of interesting because I don't think that that's usually the kids go with mom, right? I haven't met a lot of people that shared my experience with moving with dad. And as we were talking about earlier, my dad and I moved to outside of Kalispell, Montana when I was in kindergarten. And um, that was a really tough time because it's so confusing when your parents get divorced when you're that young, and then you're separated from mom and sister and you don't understand why. Um, and then just being alone all the time. Like I would get home from school at like 2 o'clock, and my dad wouldn't get home till 6 or 7. And the
Mm.
thought of my 6-year-old son being at home by himself,
Yeah.
like, and I've worked through all this, so I get the spot my dad was in because he was pretty devastated by this whole thing and trying to figure out his own mourning process and losing, his daughter and his wife and all of that. So that was a pretty tough season. My dad remarried not too long after that. That marriage lasted maybe 2 weeks, a month, and then we moved again back to Idaho. And in that time, um, my dad was working and finding, trying to figure it out, and so I was kind of bouncing around a lot, like during the summers and after school because we had family. We moved back to where I was born, and in that time, um, some people that were in my care and neighborhood kids started having me uh, do sexual things to them. Um, and at one point, it's so weird to even say this still, but like I was raped by a teenage woman who was like 17, 18, um, more than once. And it's such a weird thing because we don't think of that relationship with from women to men.
Right.
And I've often said it like this, like if it would have happened once, I probably would have thought it was a bigger deal. But the fact that this was a cycle that kept happening in my life for a few years by different people and babysitters and um like I said, neighborhood kids, I just thought it was part of the deal. It was like, okay, if I go over here in the alley and do this, then you'll be my friend and we can go ride bikes together.
Mhm.
And it was like, oh, okay. So I could get through it because these were older guys that like would let me hang out with them. And knowing what I know now about myself and how much I do love people and am and built for connection, and I get it. And it's not something that you talk about or know what to do with when you're that little. It's just like, okay. And then my dad remarried again, we moved to California, and it continued to happen in a different state. And so it was just like part of my growing up that I didn't ever it's such a weird thing that I think that kind of trauma you just lock away, and it's down there, but it's not something I ever thought about. It's not something I ever was like, I wonder how this is showing up in my life in high school.
Right.
And I have these like rejection issues, with my mom leaving and missing her and my sister. And then I had an abusive stepmom. I'll just give you a snapshot of this stepmom. I then had a stepbrother and stepsister who were a little bit younger than me. She would do things like make them breakfast, hot breakfast, pancakes, eggs,
Yeah.
bacon, carry it to their rooms, and I'd be walking the kitchen and she would say things like, if you know where the cold cereal is, if you want to fix yourself breakfast. And then when that turned to physical abuse, she would say things to me like, if you mention, because I'd be like, I'm going to tell my dad. And she would say things like, if you tell your dad, I will leave him and it will be your fault. Like the last two marriages, it was your fault that their marriage didn't work.
My.
And I often think that abuse, and that's just two examples of over a decade of that situation that really shaped me and how I related to relationships and girls and needed to be loved. So I was the guy that always needed a girlfriend. I was so codependent. I was searching for that thing. I'd go see my mom for a month in the summer, which was amazing, and get to spend time with my sister and, the occasional holiday when we lived close enough. But yeah, it really sucked. Um, but it just continually showed up, and this is all hindsight. In the moment in high school, is like, why do I spend all my time trying to figure out how to be loved, and why I always had to have a girlfriend, and it just shows up and follows you, all the unprocessed pain.
And in that topic of unprocessed pain is going to be a thread for, the rest of our conversation that we're going to keep coming back to because we all, every single one of us,
Everyone.
have areas of unprocessed pain. There's a layer just to kind of, it's very different and not to the same level of magnitude, but it does shape you as well. The layer of kind of cowboy culture and your dad moving for different jobs and what you learned and how to like the level of even your body is getting wrecked because you're training horses and getting thrown off. And can you just give us a little snapshot or color in a little bit what that was like growing up and what you learned and some skills that you acquired as a cowboy?
Yeah. So my dad is like third generation cowboy rancher. And so when we were moving around all the time, it was going from one ranch to another. And cowboys don't make any money. I think he was making $700 a month. And off the top of that, $100 was going to my mom for child support for my little sister. And he had three kids in the house. And so cowboys do that to see new country. It's like literally the payoff is you love what you do, right? And to get to ride. And so we moved to California, this beautiful area outside of the Bay Area actually, and it was just steep, rugged, beautiful country. And my whole life, all I wanted to do was be a cowboy. Like so, like for my fourth birthday, I got my first horse, and like that was it for me. Um, and then I never went to the same school for 2 years in a row till I was in high school. So that's kind of the cowboy thing is kind of like everyone always assumes grew up in the military because we moved so much because there's a saying in the cowboy world is you're always looking for the perfect outfit, right? The grass is green, and there's no
Yeah.
perfect outfit. So we just moved from ranch to ranch to ranch, um, and again, that's all I wanted to do was, in junior high, I got into sports, but man, on the weekends, I was on the ranch with dad and the cowboy crew. When we moved from California to Oregon, we only went to school 4 days a week. It was in this little tiny town of Paisley, Oregon, of like
Yeah.
100 people. Bend was like the closest big town, and it was like 2.5 hours away. um, and so I would get to go to work with my dad and the cowboy crew on Fridays and Saturdays and trot out with them. And we'd make these big, 25, 30-mile circles. And it was just, that was it for me, man. I was like, sports, sprinkle some girls in there and some cowboy stuff. And I was like, this is it.
But and the reason I wanted to just give a little bit of childhood with that layer is there's also that idea of moving to the next place and in the upside of seeing new beautiful areas of the country, but also our heart when we move to the next. I just wanted to see if there's a parallel or a string I can pull here a little bit. The going to the next hobby or activity, the moving to the next town, the building the next house, the getting a next car, the next job promotion. My guess is just like cowboys move to different areas for new jobs, like there is a side of if there's pain, one way to numb and suppress is the next adventure or hobby or activity. Is there something there?
You nailed it. So that's what was modeled to me growing up. My dad showed me how to chase down a dream, and I learned to make friends very quickly because we moved a lot, right? So that shaped me. Um, and the second I got out of high school, my football and basketball career was over. So my identity, I didn't know what I was going to do now because my identity was sports. And so it became rodeo. I was like, well, I can ride bucking horses. And that became it. And rodeo is like the perfect fit for somebody with a bunch of unprocessed pain because it is a party and you travel a lot. And I wasn't afraid of that because that's what was modeled to me is you move. And if I ever write a book, it will be called Living Life on the Run, to your point,
Yeah.
because that's all I did for 15 years. I'd move every 6 months because that unprocessed pain that we were talking about earlier inside of me, I couldn't imagine the thought of dealing with anything. And as I got older, that those things that I'd been pushing down were pushing back, right? They were pushing up. And if I could stay, and I grew up in a Christian home, went to church Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night, my whole life. But the second I had freedom and I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and was rodeoing and working on a ranch and could have the choice to drink, what an escape that was, right? And then it was seasonal work. I'd work up there and rodeo in the summer. It was like, where's the next gig? Oh, it's Arizona. They rodeo all winter down there. And it just became that was my life on the run. Every time I'd feel like something isn't right inside, it was like, let's run harder. Let's rodeo more. Let's chase more girls. The beer turned to whiskey.
Mm.
Like it just was like this perpetual
Yeah.
you gotta find more things to stuff down that thing that's trying to crawl up out of my soul that was unbearable to even think about. It was subconscious. I wouldn't even let myself go there.
And that takes
And the
us.
cowboy, yeah, the cowboy lifestyle,
Mm.
I mean, it's applauded. That guy that moves around, sees all the different parts of the country, knows all the people, is like doing the rodeo thing and all that comes with that. It's like you're a rock star, man. You don't have to deal with anything.
So I think it was about 15 years ago, a point when things shifted, and you've moved at that point from skills, rodeo skills, and all the cowboy skills to like developing equestrian programs and managing, leading ridiculous ranches. And there's a point though that led to a separation with your wife and two DUIs in a short period of time. Could you take us kind of around that period of your story?
Yeah, so I I took a year-round job um, in Wyoming managing this ranch because I really, once I retired from rodeoing, I really focused on the horse training part of things and roping, and I was getting pretty good at that and worked for some great horsemen and learned a lot. And because I was good with people and I could was good at reading a room, I just always had favor with wealthy people. Like I worked for the Rockefeller family, Rockefeller family at their private ranch in Wyoming, and um, so anyway, I don't know, I had favor with rich, wealthy, like wealthy one percenters, right? And this job opened up in Wyoming, and I took it, and it was my first year round gig, and dude, the reality of not being on the run was after the new of a brand new 5,000 square foot house and the big arena and the open checkbook. I was living like 15, 20 miles south of a 100-person town. So you take
What?
party people guy, put him in
Uh-huh.
isolation, and I'd already gotten 3 DUIs at that point, and would just I would get in these places where it's like I didn't care. I didn't care. So I get to this ranch and it's a dream. All my family comes and visits, aunts, uncles, cousins. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere at the base of the Bighorn Mountains. It's beautiful. Dream job. I couldn't keep it together, man. The drinking was always kind of the party thing, and then it turned into by myself there. And that was when I started, like, it gets dark at 4:30. I didn't have TV. It was like I just go to the bar, get drunk by myself at home, right? So that season ended, which is a whole nother story. Um, and I left and moved to, got another job for a wealthy guy in Prescott, Arizona, which is where I met my wife.
Okay.
So we get married, and she's like, I was still party guy. I started going to church with her again and kind of like, all right, I couldn't reconcile, I think subconsciously, God is good and 100% in control, and what happened to me in my life.
Right.
I couldn't get there. So this God that is so good and in control, I didn't know what to, I couldn't reconcile that. So God was like, I can't trust him because if he's in control and he's good, this doesn't add up. Right. So she's like, you're going to quit drinking when like this, when we get married, right? I'm like, yeah, what kind of maniac do you think I am? Of course I am. What kind of man drinks like this when he's married? And so we get married, and I had to start being trickier about my drinking. And then, like a few months after we get married, we get a call, and this guy wants to build this. I think we spent like $15 million, dude, on this equestrian center. Like in lieu of a golf course, he bought like 1,400 acres, and he's going to make an equestrian community. So he hires us to come build and design this huge, I mean, it was a dream job, 6 figures, like, couldn't believe it, right? And we go up there and build that thing, and pretty quickly she gets pregnant, and she's like, "You're gonna the drinking thing is gonna go away when this child's born." I'm like, "What kind of maniac do you think I am? Of course I'm not gonna drink when we have I'm not gonna raise my son, and like this." So I had to get trickier about hiding it.
Mm.
So that job, I think we were there for 3 or 4 years, built this thing. 2008 hits, economy crashes, no lots are selling. It's he's like, I'm shutting this thing down. And it was full of horses and we were doing okay. Our marriage was not doing good
Yeah.
at that point. And I was getting up at like 3 in the morning to go plow snow at the subdivision before work every day. And I'd start drinking like a bottle of Kahlua with my thermos of coffee while I was plowing snow every morning. And I got to figure out the depths of alcoholism. I could figure out how to just get enough where I could maintain and function, and then I would just stay there all day, and I knew when not to eat because it would kill it, and I knew when I needed to eat or the somebody would I would I would start being noticeably
Wow.
drunk, right? So it became science to me, and figuring out how to do it financially and all the things, dude, it was a full-time job. It was a full-time job because I had everything. I had it all. I was a big dog in town. Everybody wanted to be involved at that place.
Yeah.
I was making so much money. We just bought this huge house and it all went away in a phone call. We lost our house, truck. I mean, dude, gone. So we moved back to Arizona. And I knew when we moved back to Arizona, because I'd been sleeping on the couch for I don't know how many months or even years. And as soon as we get back to Arizona, it's not good. And pretty soon I'm sleeping not in the house anymore. I'm sleeping in a closet or a little office outside underneath got a covered arena, an apartment in front. And so I couldn't stop drinking. And she got wise to me and so she was like, we're separating. And we had counsel we went to so much counseling, and our pastor is like, "Yeah, you need to leave him. You need to separate." So I go back to Wyoming for the summer to go shoe horses and get away, and I was going to Montana to see my daughter, and I got pulled over and got a DUI in Montana. They let me out. The next day, I went and saw my daughter driving back to Wyoming 'cause I had some horses to haul to Florida actually from Wyoming, from Jackson, and was drinking all the way back from Montana, and I got pulled over again and got another DUI, like, in 48 hours, and this time they put me in jail
Good.
in Wyoming. They don't let you out till you see a judge. I had in the alleyway of the liquor store where I would buy my vodka, I would cry and beg God to take this from me, and I would pound on my steering wheel, and he didn't. And I'd wipe my tears away, and I would march into that liquor store and do it again. And sleeping on the couch, I saw what I was doing to my life and my family, my wife, and I had a little baby, and I'm like, I know you won't show up. Where were you when all this other stuff happened?
Mhm.
You're not showing up now. We're going to church. We're like going to Bible studies every Thursday, which most of the time I was halfway drunk at those. And the shame that comes along with that, right?
Right. Mm.
So they put me in jail, and something in me changed in my prayer. it was like I don't know how to explain it, Jeff, other than I asked God, I'm like, from one father to another father,
Yeah.
please take this from me. The dad that I'm gonna be, I can't do this anymore. And he took it. I don't know if it was because I wasn't praying to get out of my circumstances anymore, which I think looking back, my prayers to him were always to get me out of the mess that I'd created. But there was something about me pulling on heaven as a dad and crying out to a dad that I think was the difference. And his perfect timing.
Yeah.
And I don't care about anybody's theology because you can't take away my experience.
Story.
But I felt I felt this thing leave me
You did.
that night. Scientifically, I should have detoxed. I was drinking a handle of vodka a day. I should have been deathly ill.
Right.
I I've never had a craving of alcohol since that night. I've never been tempted. I've never found myself parked in front of the liquor store. I was at a I was at a bar till 2 in the morning 2 weeks ago celebrating my buddy's 50th birthday. Like
Mm.
I can
Mm.
the smell, the none of it.
Mm.
It was bro, it was he took it. It was gone. And for those of anyone listening that that isn't the case, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That sometimes I've had to fight for a lot of other things, but he took this for me and from me. Now I was in a lot of trouble, a lot of trouble. The interesting thing is in the following week was the first time I ever put a gun in my mouth. I'd never dealt with anything sober before.
Oh.
Why would I think about suicide? I was I was numb. I had a solution to the pain, but now I didn't because he took it. It was gone. So I was staying in a cabin. I couldn't leave this. I couldn't leave the county for like a week. I had to go in at like 5 in the morning and blow in the thing at the sheriff's office. I would read my Bible in the morning, and by that night, I literally would put three in the chamber and spin it. Partially relieved and partially pissed that it didn't happen. Like the tension of wanting it to end and to for it not to was like the craziest space as you can imagine I've ever been in. And that happened I think for like 5 or 6 nights in a row. One morning I was reading Psalms 32:5, and I don't know why that I'd read it a million times prior to that, but it was what changed everything. I confessed all my sins, and he forgave forgave them. He forgave me. And I don't that was it. That was the I was like, okay, I'm going to trust him because it was the shame.
Yeah.
And I didn't know all this, right? This is
Hmm.
15 years of processing that I get to reveal this now, but
Right.
I had so much shame of my childhood, all the things, but what I had done to my wife and my daughter and my 2-year-old son. The shame was mostly geared towards my wife. And I knew that that was over. Like, okay, I'm gonna have to face all this, and it's gonna be a long haul because I was in a lot of trouble.
Mm.
And rightfully so, is when after I had the courage to call my wife and tell her. I didn't even tell her about the first one. I only told her about the second one. She's like, I knew it. I knew you couldn't do it. And she wasn't wrong. And so she moved out, bought her own house, and divorce papers were on the table. I came back and started getting help. I had to go to a lot of outpatient counseling for the state of Wyoming, right? Um, but yeah, I just remember like saying yes to all the things. I had to go to AA. I said yes to that. I said yes to spending time with my pastor at the time. I said yes to all the outpatient counseling that I had to do. I'm like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. And then God just started sprinkling the right people for the
Mm.
season of life that I was in.
Mm. So, Jeremy, the hopelessness really, like, there was a wave of that after freedom from the grip of alcohol and the numbing, really the grip of being numb and pushing down the feelings and the pain. Then there was a wave of hopelessness because the mountain of choices you had made, decisions you had made, the mountain hit you those 5 straight nights. And it's interesting. It's wild that you're reading scripture, but like the swelling up of that mountain and the amount of harm already done, right? And but then there was at the end of day 5, it sounds like there was a moment of like, I'm gonna go do the thing. I'm gonna go step. It was forgiveness, right? Is that what you're saying? That like, actually
Yeah.
experiencing forgiveness led you to the trail
Yeah.
towards healing?
Which I think was what, for me, again, it was really the shame of all of the things. And like, everybody was super bummed out at me. I'd let everybody down.
Yeah.
And if God can forgive me, the question became, is that enough for me to carry on? And again, it's something that I just felt like the Holy Spirit speaking to me through that scripture, that I was like, okay, if I got one person on my side,
Yeah.
just turns out that that happened to be the creator of the universe. I was
Yeah.
like, okay,
That'll do.
all right,
Wow. And
let's
just
go.
so one more time, just make sure I understand this. There was freedom from the
Addiction,
addiction,
all of
right?
it.
Freedom led to you needed hope, and then you needed, like, there was a forgiveness piece of like, oh, I've got forgiveness, I've got the ally, I've got the someone fighting for me, which was God, and then a journey of all the people that you'd hurt. Um,
Oh,
you
dude.
share a little more about that step to the process?
I remember reaching out to some mentors and their disgust and like, you blew it in that moment. And these people had been advocates for me forever, and letting them down, that's when I felt the most alone. I was like, and but I could get it. I guess I just never really went the victim route. there's this weird space of like, what happened to me wasn't my fault, but taking ownership of everything, of the actions that I did, even though there's something that I'm pretty sure that my life would have turned out differently had not these things happened to me, right? And I think this is such a blurry line that so many people miss is I went on a journey of finding compassion for that little boy and myself in the midst of owning the messes I'd made in the process. And I learned that early on. And I'm really grateful for that now because I could totally see why my wife would leave me and tell me that it was over and it was done. And
Yeah.
what a mess I'd made. And but that tension of like carrying space for compassion for yourself, but also accountability is freaking hard and it's tricky. But I don't know how you get through this without it. Because if you can't say you're sorry and begin to clean up messes, if you got the victim card in your back pocket that you pull out
Mhm.
every time anybody pushes back and agrees with how big of a jerk you've been and how you've blown up their lives. And I just see that happen so many times. Well, if you, they just pull it out. And it's like, you just undid anything you were trying to do and validating anybody for the mess you've made. And it's hard. And it ego and it all gets in the way and gets real messy. But I I was going to this outpatient and there was this black lady from Chicago named Gwen. Bro, I'm convinced. I've tried to find her and I cannot. She's an angel. She was an ex-heroin addict.
Mm.
And anytime I would start to be a little bit of a victim
Mm.
in group, she would like shut it down and she would make me own everything. Mary bought her own house, moved out. Gwen made me go over there, paint the house, pay for everything, redo the floors, help them move. I wanted nothing to do with that. You know how my wife's whole family came to help? And I'm like, I'm not going over there. I'm not going within 20 miles of that place. And she would not let me off the hook, bro. You know how embarrassing and scary it was to go submerge
Mhm.
myself into my wife's family as they're helping her move into her new house because she had to leave me. And the the lessons I got in humility in that time and space have served me very well. I think raising sons and now, right? But it was so hard to do.
That's all. I mean, the word humility and like the path of humility and ownership. And you owned it. You were humble. In this case, Gwen forced some humility, which is such a gift. And like I wish that
Such a gift.
everyone would have that kind of an angel, like someone who could help force because you had God. You knew He forgave you. You knew His invite is there's compassion, there's love, like you said. But there's also responsibility, and there's patiently and humbly walking it out. I love that story about Gwen. Oh man.
Yeah, she's
Uh,
I can't wait to I gotta track her down somehow.